The first question is there's two questions, but they're related. What would be your number one priority as governor, and what would your first 90 days in office look like?
Right, I've already touched on the need for Medicaid reform and reform for health care for state employees. They're really two different things. The governor does drive the Medicaid program through the Department of Community Health. And several states have already done what I'm talking about. They require recipients to sign contracts. They may have a two-tiered program for recipients that participate or don't. Those are things that can be done through administrative change or rule change or executive order. Depending on how far you want to go, some of those things might require federal permission. So my first act would be to do what I could within Medicaid under existing federal rules to engage the recipients and require them to sign a contract in return for the benefits. With state employees, we need to restructure health programs for state employees. The governor negotiates that, and we have a commission of the state employer that does this work. 5 states now link benefits for state employees to their smoking status and their BMI. Those are the types of things that a new governor could walk in and begin working on right away.
Next question, it's actually the most common recurring question from around the state. Would you support right to work?
Yes. And by the way, just one comment on right to work. It would be very difficult to get it through the legislature. A con might be a mechanism, if the legislative path is blocked.
Next question is related to term limits. Given the gridlock in the legislature that we've all seen over the last several years, what's your position on doing away with term limits in Michigan?
If I had a magic wand, I would not do away with them. I would extend them some. But I would even prefer to have a part-time legislature with part-time benefits, per diem pay, and again, that could be done through a constitutional convention. 43 states have part-time legislatures. They're all doing better than we are.
You mentioned the 1 million jobs lost in Michigan over the last decade. At the same time, we have a government that's been structured to support a state with 1 million more jobs. We often read about the fact that Michigan is unique across the country with over 2,000 taxing jurisdictions. What are your thoughts and ideas in the area of local municipal government consolidation?
I don't think that we can afford the many layers of government that we have. And they didn't come out of nowhere. You should know why we have townships, why we have elected drain commissioners. We used to elect the state fair director in Michigan, and we had the longest serving elected highway commissioner. There's a reason. In our territorial days, this was viewed as an inducement to settlers, to say we were civilized. So our territorial governor in the 1830s and 40s helped craft the township system and all these multiple elected officials so he could convince potential settlers out east. See, we're civilized in Michigan. We've made treaties with Native Americans, and we have plank roads, and we have local governments, so you should come here. That's where they came from. And most of these have persisted in constitution after constitution. And look, I understand there are some benefits, too, to local government, but it's time to reassess. It's time to ask the question again, can we afford, do we need, can we justify continuing the number that we have? School districts are a good example. I've got neighboring school districts that have bus systems and administrations and libraries, and think how much more efficient and better they might be if they pooled some of those things. So there's a great potential for savings if we can push that.
You mentioned the governor's budget being out of balance. Looking at next year, a potential budget deficit at the state level of nearly $2 billion, what would be your plan to get there to cover that shortfall if you were elected governor?
Well, one of the advantages being in the state Senate, I'm working with my Senate colleagues now, and we've introduced a whole series of reforms. If you're following, you may know we have a measure that says all state employees would take a 5% wage cut and would be required to have a 20% buy-in for their health premiums. This is something I've co-sponsored and I'm worked with my colleagues on. Now, a couple of those measures are constitutional, and they would have to go to the voters and be approved, to have effect by October 1st. What are the chances of that happening? It takes a 2/3 vote to get them on the ballot, probably slim. Again, it speaks to the need for constitutional reform. But let's say failing that, failing those reforms, I think what you'll be likely to see is the Senate, and I'll vote with my Senate colleagues, we're going to pass a budget that's based on the reality of the day. It's going to be tough because there'll be more cuts a-coming, and we'll just spread them around as fairly as we can. It'll be very difficult. But failing major structural reforms, the only option left is to make cuts without, and the cuts are difficult because they're without thinking. They're just slashing here and there. It's much better to make structural reforms.
Here's a question as to your motivation for running. Why, some people actually have written the question, why in the world would you want to be governor of this state given the cuts and the chaos that would await you? So if you could talk to us a bit about your motivation for running for governor.
You're all here because you have an interest in the future of Michigan. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be active members in your association. And you know that times have been difficult, and you see a difficult short-term future, but we also know that the long-term future in Michigan is bright. We have great natural resources, we have a hard-working people, and we all know that there's also opportunity when times are tough. It is an opportunity to restructure and rebuild Michigan. And so, I think I bring a unique set of tools to the table. As a working physician, healthcare is a big issue. I've got good support from my family. My youngest is now 15, and I have 2 in college. My wife's very supportive. So I think I bring something, and I'm looking forward to it.
The last question I have for you is more of a parochial question. Obviously, our members here are being hit by the economy. General business climate types of issues are the most important. However, as many economists have mentioned, that the housing sector, when you look at coming out of a recession, typically has provided about 1/3 of the economic activity to help pull the nation and the state out of recession. Some states are looking to implement tax credits for new home construction. As governor, would you be willing to support or look at tax credits to spur activity in the housing sector?
I would be willing to consider those things. And I think if you looked at my voting record, again, I've been here, and I'm familiar with your association. I'm not a home builder, so I rely on you for advice and guidance, and I think I've been pretty good about following it. And I would continue to take your input very seriously. And I do know that the tax code, tax credits, and other features of it can be used to help stimulate the housing industry, and I know how important it is to our local communities.